Hi guys, welcome to the discussion or the topic I'm holding here live in my Facebook group. You're with me, Maymin Meftahi, and I am a qualified psychotherapist, a qualified NLP practitioner, independent advocate, and fitness instructor. And I really wanted to bring you a kind of discussion, maybe an insight into the inner child journey of toxic parents. So we are going to get a little bit real and a little bit raw with this discussion, and it may be a little bit triggering for some of us as well, because it's one of those subjects that maybe we're not aware of, maybe we thought about it but we haven't really dealt with it, or maybe this is going to be completely new to you and hopefully bring a sense of awakening, some understanding. So there is loads to get through. So I don't want to obviously take up too much of your time as well, but I am aware that this is slightly different to how I normally do my videos, and I'm going live in my Facebook group. So I will be trying to check on comments. So please show some love if you are here live. And hashtag if you are going to be watching the replay. Trying to get those algorithms going, ladies. And there will be a Q&A post later on for those of you that have questions, you're watching it back. And if I do miss anything throughout the live. Okay, I am trying to just quickly bring up to see if I can see any comments, because going live and on Zoom recording hopefully as well. I can't see anything yet, but I will keep trying, so I'm going to crack on. I'm going to say good evening, hello, good morning from wherever you are in the world. Thank you again for joining me here live on this topic of toxic parenting. Okay, it is an extremely important topic, Bilan. You are so right, and we don't talk about it. I've got my little notes here purely because, like you said, it's such a strong topic. It's a really important topic, and it actually comes with a lot of complexities. So I can't get through everything about the topic, but I'm certainly going to really just go straight in there for you and give you as much as I can. Okay. So first of all, we're going to break it down. I'm going to work in like sections of toxic parenting, and we're going to start firstly with denial and facing facts. Okay, so I'm going to give you like a briefing on each part, and then I want you to do some reflective thinking. I'm going to be asking you some questions. You're more than welcome to place your answers in the comments if you feel safe to do so, and I'm hoping that you do, providing you this safe space so that you can do that. And also you can do your own healing as such in terms of this topic, because it can be really hard to face the reality of childhood experiences, right? So sometimes we want to believe that our childhood was so idyllic, right? Our childhood hasn't impacted us, but unfortunately that seems to be easier than facing the facts, that suffering or trauma is minimized or discounted in discussions about the past, right? And rather all the happy times are remembered. So you may even feel this with your own family, that sometimes you'll be sitting listening to a conversation with your family talking, and they're talking about all these happy memories, and in your head you're thinking, well, where was I? Because I don't remember that part. But what you're doing is you're trying to cover up and deny that, looking back at your past, maybe with those rose tinted glasses, and often believing that everything is fine, maybe that my parents are right. And that's what a small child would do in order to survive. So what we then end up doing is seeing our parents' behaviour as normal and trying to mould ourselves into their behaviour or how they want us to behave. And that's, again, that's in order to survive. So it brings about a survival coping mechanism in us from a really early age of being a child. And the issue that we have with this, and we're going to address this a lot later, is that this can continue into our adulthood, right? So not wanting to lose their place in the family, not wanting to lose your place in the family, wanting to please our parents, or valuing the family so highly that we try to kind of dismiss the toxicity that's going on within the family. Things like also not wanting to rock the boat, or in order to displease your parents, or things like causing family arguments or drama. And we're going to look more about these kind of things that we get told within our childhood. So this desire that we have for acceptance and approval within the family, both in terms of their behaviour in childhood and behaviour in the present, can then lead to continuous denial about parents, right? We want to continue this denial about our parents. We're trying to just push it all to one side and be like, well, okay, maybe this, maybe that, right? And this is because, and well, also the issue that we have here is that when you are denying the family hierarchy, or what's actually happening inside a family home, this brings about blame on yourself, right? So you start to blame yourself, even in your adulthood, just as you did in your childhood, right? Instinctively, when we're going through abuse, neglect, or any other issues, as a child, we know that something is not right, okay? We know that something is wrong because we know that we are suffering. Maybe, as a child, we will feel hurt. A child will feel unsafe, humiliated, devastated, angry, alone, confused, and so much more. But due to the fact that you're having to survive, and you've had to survive with your parents in childhood, you simply just cannot blame the parents, right? Because you've had to continue your lifeline and into your adulthood with the same parents that created this toxic environment when you were a child. So we're getting really complex now, and we're getting confused with that denial of, well, my childhood was not so great. So what happens instead is the child blames himself or herself, right? So the child starts to feel, well, I'm to blame. Now, I hear this constantly during my sessions with my clients. When we're doing any type of healing work, I hear so much, and maybe this is going to resonate with you, that, well, I was a difficult child. I misbehaved lots. I was hard to look after. I must have just been impossible as a child. There must have been something wrong with me, or things like my parents did the best they could in terms of, right? So we start having this denial coping mechanism that then starts to actually put blame on to yourself. So the child becomes to blame for the toxic environment that the parents have brought into the home. And again, feel free to comment, because this is used so widely, and probably in all cultures and all backgrounds, that, I'm the black sheep of the family. I'm the kind of, I'm the odd one out of the family. I was always the one that was being naughty, or I was always the one that was doing this and that. So already, and that could come about from being told that from your parents, like, you just always the one that's doing this, that, and the other. So what happens is, as a child, we start to believe that we are defective, right? Or that something is wrong with us, or as in the child. So what we do is we try to change ourselves and censor our own behaviours to try to become more acceptable to the parent, right? And to win what we call the 4 A's. Yeah. So as a child, when you're having this toxic environment around you, you start to put it onto yourself. And then what you're doing is you're trying to live up to or be the child that your parent wants you to be, not the child that you are supposed to be. And so then we start to win the 4 A's. Now, the 4 A's are attention, approval, affirmation, and affection. So that's what a child is trying to then win within this family toxic environment. You're trying to win it, not get it naturally, not have those needs met naturally. You're trying to win the 4 A's. And the issue again is that this can carry on into adulthood too. So the adult, now as an adult, you place too much responsibility on your former child self that's actually inappropriate for your age, okay? So maybe you will excuse the neglectful or the abusive behavior from your parents while then blaming yourself because of the phrases I've just mentioned. So, you know, you're the black sheep of the family. I was always the one that was getting into trouble. I was always the misbehaving one, etc., etc. And these phrases are also put onto children very, very early on within the toxic environment. And so what happens is those 4 A's, those emotional needs that weren't met as a child continues into adulthood. So this is then going to bring a more reinforced feeling by the parent, right? During their childhood and their adulthood. Because if you're still connected to your family members, which many still are, because you've grown up in denial to not face the facts of what your childhood was actually about, then you're still in adulthood, right? So you're still receiving the same reinforcement with the toxic behavior. So the parent may blame the child for their own parenting choices, right? And refuse to admit any wrongdoing or any negative effect on their actions, right? So let's think about this. So this is a reflective moment for you guys now, okay? I want you to think about how many times have you tried to address the behavior of your parents? And have you ever tried to address the behavior of your parents? Okay. The second thing I want you to think about is, have you been met with phrases like I've just said above? So, well, you just never listened to me. So let's just say you try to address your mum. You're an adult now. You're like, Mum, you really didn't meet my emotional needs as a child. You never gave me the attention. And your mum just comes at you and she's like, well, you were never listening. You never listened to me. You know, you're always misbehaving. So you've come to regain some kind of inner child healing from this toxic environment, but actually you're reinforced with, you are the one to blame. It was your behavior. You never listened, right? Or maybe you're met with things like, oh, why couldn't you have just been like such and such? You know, why couldn't you have just been like that family member? Why couldn't you have just done what they did? Why do you have to always be the one that's doing this and that and the black sheep of the family and the odd one out? So once again, the child within is being rejected. It's not being listened to, right? And they then take on the feeling of blame, being heavily placed on their shoulders. But actually, it's coming from the toxic environment of the parent. But it's now being passed on to the child, or even in the childlike adulthood, where you're trying to find out why wasn't my emotional needs met? I'm just a child, right? However, we know that a child is never ever to blame for any environment, and we're going to talk about those environments coming up. What are toxic environments? And I'm going to focus on the main ones, right? So again, reflective task for you is, I want you to take a minute or, you know, just take a little bit of time now to think about whether you actually take that blame. And again, this is reflecting back to the core belief that I was talking about in my previous topic, which was about, do you deep down think, well, actually, yeah, I was just a naughty child, and not, you know, I'm to blame that my parents didn't provide the 4 A's, the attention, the approval, and the affection, and the affirmation that I needed, because, yeah, maybe I was just a really bad child. So do you actually think and take on the blame that's come from your parents? The second thing I want you to think about is, do you live in denial of your parents' behaviours? So do you try to cover up? You know deep down inside that you've come from a toxic environment, but, well, my parents, you know, they did the best they could, or, you know, we lived in poverty, or, you know, this, that, and the other. So are you trying to live in denial of your parents' behaviour? Because, as I said right from the beginning, as a child, we know instinctively if we are not having our emotional needs met. Now, I'm not talking as a, you know, our 0 to 5. I'm also talking about within our teenage years, when we start to get that grasp of, my emotional needs are not being met by my parents, right? Maybe there's a toxic environment. There's lots of shouting. There's, again, these phrases that are being used that are actually, you know, reinforcing that you are the problem, right? You're the problem, not me. I did my best as a mum, as a parent. You were the issue, okay? And then the third thing I want you to think about is, do you make excuses for them? So just like I gave you an example there, are you making excuses for their behaviour? So there's some reflective questions that I just want you to think about. And this is why I've added a Q&A post that will follow up after this discussion, so that I can address any of these questions when you're thinking about them, and maybe that you start to feel them and they come up for you. Now, I'm going to talk about abuse and neglect, okay? So this is how I want you to think about, firstly, are you breaking the chain? So are you continuing the pattern of abuse and neglect within your own household and with your children? And secondly, do you recognize any of this within your childhood? So this is what I said, it's going to get real, we're going to get raw. And it's going to get even realer towards the end, when we have to accept responsibility for who we are now and who we are trying to become. So we're going to start off with, of course, it goes without saying that if we've experienced horrific abuse and neglect, then we are likely to recognize that, right? I know, personally speaking from lived experience, the abuse that I went through. So I'm not in denial of how my emotional needs were not met. And of course I know that. However, there will be many, many people, and many of you watching this now, that have suffered milder forms of abuse and neglect, right? And this is also who I want to try to touch upon as well. Though they may not have been as intense, they will still have a lasting, profound impact on how you are today, how you think, how you feel, and how you behave. So the problem that we have, obviously, with the milder forms of abuse and neglect is that it's hard to recognize it, based on the fact of denial and having to face the fact that, okay, my parents were really toxic, right? I mean, that's a really, really hard thing for anybody that's still within their family homes, or who's still, you know, having that bond with their family, to actually face up to. So we're going to start off with the first one, which is emotional abuse, which obviously is also known as psychological abuse, right? So the most common form of child abuse, and it's this one, it's emotional abuse. And it can be done in 2 ways, right? So basically it can be done in omission. So what is an omission is what is not done, right? So that kind of encompasses the emotional neglect. So like I was saying before, such as not showing love, withholding affection, ignoring, etc., right? So this is like, you know, if you've not tidied up, let's say you're young and you were shouted at and you were told to tidy up, and then you didn't tidy up, so you were withheld from having any affection, right? Or you was ignored, okay? So this is done through omission. It's something that is not done, so you're not getting it. And then we have commission, which is what is done. So this encompasses rejecting the child, like literally rejecting the child, insulting the child, okay, humiliating them, restricting the child opportunities. And this can be in that kind of what we may see as that low level form of commission, where it's like, oh yeah, look, she's getting fat, she's put some weight on, but it's said with other family members around you, right? So you feel absolutely humiliated. And I know that we have this everywhere, and it's just taken to be the norm, right? It's just kind of like socially accepted to make a dig at your child in front of other people, but it's humiliating them. Or maybe actually you are trying to humiliate them. So parents who are emotionally abusive, often have their own unresolved trauma, okay? It can be difficult for them to see the child separate from themselves and to see the child as a kind of a valid entity, you know, a child that has its own way of thinking, a child that has its own thoughts and opinions and feelings. So kind of like, you know, a parent who's emotionally abusive is like trying to connect you and warp you into one, right? And the issue being as well is that they may have shut off their own inner child, right? So they've never really healed from that and dealt with their own inner child. And so they actually do find the child's behavior triggering, right? Because what they're doing is they're seeing a mirror of themselves in their child. And then what's happening is they are being triggered. Now, I see this a lot and I hear it a lot where, you know, someone will say to me, oh, my child just really like irritates me. I can't cope with the behavior. But actually, it could be that it's a trigger of your own behavior. It's a trigger of your own inner child healing that hasn't been addressed. Excuse me, I'm going to need to cough. Okay, it's not corona, I promise. It's just a cold. Okay, so to make and what this is to do is to make the child behave in a way that is comfortable for them, right? So your parents want you to behave in a way that's comfortable for them, in a way that they want you to behave. They want you to sit quietly and you know, be seen but not heard. They don't want you jumping around and releasing all that built up energy. They just want to be comfortable because they can't right now deal with whatever they've got to deal with. So they may then use aggression, intimidation, manipulation, or emotional blackmail, right? So think about that. Think about how that could be used. And emotionally abused children will then tend to be emotionally disengaged, okay? So the child is going to find it very difficult to make friends. The child is going to behave antisocially or too maturely. So, you know, when we will say, oh, that kid's got, you know, it's got a really wise head, you know, that kid may be acting too maturely because it's taking on the issues of the parent. It's trying to be the parent because the parent can't provide its emotional needs, right? So also what can then happen is obviously a child is going to suffer from depression and anxiety. Now, adults who were emotionally abused as children will often suffer in relationships. Their relationship issues are often caused by the normalization of the abusive pattern because of their relationship with their parents, right? So, for example, if you grew up trying to please an abusive parent, then they may fall into the same type of relationship with their spouse. And they tend to misinterpret other people's behavior and misread social cues, right? So obviously we're continuing the chain here. And this is the issue, you know, and I know it's triggering and people don't want to face facts, right? We don't want to deal with the fact that actually, have I broken the chain, or am I actually becoming a toxic parent? Because children are not at fault, right? So we have to face the fact. And the only way you are going to heal and you're going to break the chain is by facing facts. And that's going to hurt, right? But that's the issue, because that's why we're in so much turmoil, because people don't want to do it. They don't want to watch, they don't want to listen, and they want to turn off from it because they can't deal with it. It's triggering. But think about the child, and then think about how you were once a child. Would you have wanted your mum or your dad or your caretaker or your parent to listen to this so that maybe they could have broken the chain? Because I'm telling you now, speaking from a personal experience, I really wish mine had beyond limits. So I know facing the fact and the reality is going to be hard, but that's the whole point. Now, I want you to think about how you grew up. I told you we're getting real, we're getting raw, okay? Because that's how we heal, ladies. We don't heal from pussyfooting around and going, well, you know, I went through this and well, my parents did this and now I'm just like an absolute a-hole and hey-ho, I'm going to continue the chain because poor me. We're not going there, right? We're not going there. And if it is too triggering because you're going to have to face your fact, then now is not the time for you to be watching it. Now is not the time for you to be going through this healing journey. But unfortunately, my lovelies, and I love you, and this is why I do what I do, your children, they're going to be continuing in your cycle. And I know it because I've got children myself. I have 3 boys, age 4, 7, and 11. And I've only had to really get deep and do this because I don't want my children to be continue the cycle for their wives, right? I've got 3 boys. Is it fair that my 3 boys go into their marriages and put their toxic parenting from me onto that person? It's so not fair. So, you know, I am real, I get raw, I get deep, and I speak what I feel. And it doesn't please everybody, and it doesn't come up, you know, through to everybody in the way that it should. But I'm not going to make any apologies. I'm really not, because like I said, maybe there are many of us that wouldn't have had to suffer at the hands of our parents if we'd actually discussed these topics. So I want you to think about how you grew up. Were you always trying to please an abusive parent, right? And was it ever good enough? Did you ever feel good enough? Did you ever feel that actually you met that pleasing that was required from you? Yeah? Looking back, how did that make you feel, right? I want you to look back. I want you to think about how that made you feel. And then I want you to look forward. And how does that affect your relationship today? How does it affect what you expect from your partner or what you expect from your children? Okay? And if you're in a relationship with someone that you suspect is in denial of their own childhood, so maybe you're married, for example, you've got a husband and you really think that actually he's suffering from denial of his childhood because maybe he's still, as an adult, trying to please his parents and try to fit in, yeah? To the point, and we know this, ladies, we've got this in our environment where, you know, we're thrown to the bottom and our, you know, and we're not looked at and regarded and respected to the way that we should be. So if that's the case, then how has it affected how you are being treated? If you've got a partner who you suspect is in denial of their childhood and their toxic parenting, how is that going to be affecting you and your relationship? Okay, and this is the question, right? This is the question for those who are suspecting they are in a relationship like this. Can you live up to the mother? Can you live up to the mother? And we have this, and it's ridiculous, where it's just, you know, you just have to live up to the mother, and it's never ever good enough, you know. And I'm working with a lot of women who are in this position, and this is why I'm talking about it, because this is not to put blame onto you or to me or the child or anybody. This is about to face facts, right? This is facing facts. This is owning our stuff, ladies, right? And can you ever do enough for them without them finding fault, right? And again, maybe from a relationship perspective, maybe from a parent perspective, you know, ever feel like you just can't do enough and always trying to do more and they still find that fault? Are you positioned higher than your family members, right? Or in a relationship, are are you not positioned high enough? You're at the bottom of the hierarchy, yeah? You're thrown to the bottom because you can't live up to the sister and the sister-in-law and the mother and the mother-in-law, you know, and so you're just literally thrown to the bottom of the hierarchy. Because what you're also then dealing with, and this is a lesson for us to think about, is we are dealing with a partner, a husband or a wife, who is in denial of their own childhood and their own toxic upbringing. Okay, so yeah, it's hard. I'm conscious of time, but I'm just going to look. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, it's hard. So I've got a comment here saying absolutely, but it's so worth it. It is worth it because, you know, the truth hurts. We know this, and we have to own it in order to make a difference in this world, and we have to own it in order to make a difference to ourselves. Okay, so we're moving on to the second one, which is neglect. Okay, so neglect constitutes to not being able to adequately provide for a child's needs, right? Now, this can include things like, you know, not being able to provide food, or clothing, or love, or care, and support, and education, and guidance, etc. Okay. Now, again, remembering that neglect can be unintentional. Okay. So again, yes, it's hard to accept, yes, it's hard to listen to, but neglect can be unintentional because many parents are not able to physically or mentally take care of a child, right? And ultimately because of it, maybe it's because of disability, maybe it's because of an illness, a physical illness, maybe it's a mental illness, or maybe it's their own unresolved traumas, substance abuse, living in poverty, etc., etc., etc. So when you hear neglect, it's not always intentional, right? It can be unintentional. But what we have to think about is how that's going to impact a child. And remember, you are that child, right? I'm not just talking about your children to one side and you're now feeling all this blame and shame because you've got children. I'm talking about you. You were once this child, okay? So neglected children, they may often be overly affectionate with strangers, or maybe they seem to form strong bonds with strangers quite quickly. But then on the opposite end, they can be anxious, they can lack confidence, and they can act out aggressively, right? You know, how a child behaves is long listed, yeah? Then we're looking at neglected children who will also struggle to control their intense emotions, right? And have emotional outbursts. And all of these are going to carry on into adulthood. Now, I know it's going to be triggering for some, but you know what? I'm not going to beat around the bush just because I'm going to take your triggers into account. I'm not taking your triggers into account because when I talk about toxic upbringings, when I talk about abuse and neglect, I don't take triggers into account, okay? So I'm not going to apologize that this may sound triggering, because it's really important that, like I said, we take ownership of this. And that's part of how we break the chain. We become responsible. Because neglected children are going to have emotional outbursts. So we are, as parents, and I know this myself, I have been there where I've been, you know, struggling with my own issues and maybe not feeling well, and my child had an emotional outburst, and I've just reacted in whichever way, you know, again, missing the 4 A's, maybe not giving them affirmation, maybe not giving them the attention. And like I said, this is not about blaming us as parents. It's a concept of and a process of how we will end up in these situations. Now, I'm going to move on to the third part of how a toxic parent and upbringing can look like, and that's with physical abuse. So sometimes this can actually be done as a form of discipline, right? So what I was saying before about the social norm on how to discipline a child, or other times it can be obviously deliberate. So again, we're looking at the same aspect of neglect where we've got intentional, unintentional. And it can be very difficult to draw the line between these, which is obviously the issue when it comes to physical abuse, because you'll see yourself, sometimes you'll see a parent and it's, you know, that's how I'm disciplining my child, but it may feel really uncomfortable with what you're seeing or what you're hearing. So it still constitutes to abuse when it causes the child fear or is intended to cause the child fear. So this is unpredictable behaviour, this is lashing out. And adults who have obviously been physically abused as a child, we also have to, like I said, take the concept this could be socially acceptable, because they have an unrealistic expectation of their child's behaviour, and because they have their own maybe emotional issues and anger issues. So children who suffer from physical abuse, they can be hypervigilant, they can be mistrustful, they can be anxious, especially if the abuse is unpredictable. Then obviously they're going to be living on that high alert all the time. They may be controlling, domineering or aggressive in order to try to control other people's behavior, because they're looking at this control and this power parade that we've got going on. They may also have outbursts of fear, grief or rage in response to like everyday situations. Now, those of you who have been on my trauma recovery program, you will already have been entered into this. We've already done a lot of, you know, deep, real hard work on ourselves, you know, how we can't deal with like what is seen as normal everyday situations, maybe having outbursts or emotional reactions that just seem completely like crazy, without want of a better word. So the problem that again we're continuing as an adult, so if you've experienced physical abuse as a child, as an adult, if you have been physically abused, then they're going to go two ways, right? They may become very aggressive and violent themselves, or they may become victims of physical abuse again. So this is where we have to tread really carefully with the environment that we're growing up into, because it's going to determine the future of how we think, we feel and we act, right? And obviously both of these may seem, or it's because they've seen the threat, yeah, the threat of violence in every normal day situation. Okay, so to recap, we've talked about the denial, we've talked about facing facts. Yes, it's hard, it hurts, the truth hurts, right? We've looked at the forms of toxicity in a family, in a household, whether it's through the form of emotional abuse, whether it's physical, whether it's just neglect, whether it's that you're not, you know, you've not had those 4 A's met. So blame and responsibility is the next part I'm going to touch upon, and that's seeing a child's innocence, right? That they can never ever ever be at blame for the way that they were neglected or, you know, treated or abused by their parents. It's really that simple. And I'm going to remind you again that I'm talking about you, okay? So put you at the forefront here as well. You were once a child. You were never to blame for what your parents brought around you, put on top of you, weighed you down. You were a child, okay? And children can never ever be blamed for driving, you know, their parents to neglect or abuse. That responsibility remains with them, right? And I need anyone who's trying to deal with this and get into that inner child. You were a child. You are not the blame and the driving factor to why your parent treated you the way. It's not because you were always misbehaving or you never listened, okay? So it's about, again, getting rid of some of these core beliefs that have transpired through the toxic parenting. And you, who you are now, who you are today, if this is triggering you because maybe you see some of these signs now continuing with your own children or your own relationships with family, with husbands, with spouses and partners and whatever, then go easy on yourself, quite honestly, because you were once a child. So this isn't about blaming you. This is about recognizing where it's come from and how are we then going to break the chain. So this is the most important part, isn't it? Because once we recognize and we do the hard stuff of actually accepting that this is the facts, yeah? When we stop trying to make excuses for our parents who didn't meet our 4 A's, right? Who didn't affirm us as children, who didn't give us approval, and didn't give us attention and affection, once we stop trying to cover them up, that's how we can break the chain. You are not going to break the chain by running away and by going into that activated flight mode because you've been triggered, so you just want to run from it. That's not going to break the chain. It's not going to break the chain if you don't sit down and say, do you know what, I was just a child, yeah, and I deserved to have my 4 A's. I deserved to have my emotional needs met. So how are we going to break the chain? Well, this is the first thing, isn't it? We have to hold parents accountable, right? Despite their own childhood traumas or upbringing, it is never an excuse for how they've treated their children. It is, however, an explanation, right? So we can think about, okay, well, my mum, for example, she was in an abusive marriage herself, and so, you know, I understand that maybe she couldn't meet giving me affection. She was, you know, dealing with her own traumas, etc., etc. Yeah, that's an explanation, right? Absolutely, but it's not an excuse. And that's probably the problem that we have with society, is that the fact that we kind of interlink them. Well, yeah, I'm going to excuse her behavior, I'm going to excuse my parents' behavior because of. No, it's an explanation. It will help you to heal your inner self. It would help you to understand the chain, okay? So you can hold your parents accountable for their own actions. They were adults with responsibilities, and while you were just an innocent child. And I know this can be difficult to acknowledge, and especially if you've been excusing your parents for such a long time and you find it hard to put them accountable, of course. And it's gonna, the issue is, right, ladies, until we hold them accountable, we're always going to blame ourselves. We're always going to suffer internally. We're always never going to heal the inner child, the lost child that, you know, did not have its needs met. So this is not about, you know, necessarily going to your parents and going, right, you know, I've thought about this toxic environment that you brought me up in, and I'm going to hold you accountable, right? No, it isn't about that, although, you know, if that's a situation you can do. Okay, so what's going to happen is when you recognize this accountability, you're going to have a shift. You're going to have a shift in the relationship. You're going to have a shift in your own relationships. You're going to shift with how you treat your children, right? That's what's going to happen, because you're going to recognize and you're going to no longer feel that blame, and you're going to no longer be in fear of not doing the right things and being a bad mum and being hated on. You're not going to be in fear to tell your children off because maybe you've not met their affection, you know, the affection needs that they've got. You know, you're not gonna then continue a chain, right? And that is going to shift in you. It's going to shift in all and everything. And like I said, this is not about now putting up your guns and saying, hey, I'm going to go and fight my parents. This is about you doing internal work, right? And I always talk about this is internal work. There is no justice in this world for anything, right? We know that. I know that. I'm speaking from experience. You know, my father's walking the streets right now. There is no justice. I've got to do justice inside here, yeah? That's where my justice is going to come. So whilst you don't have to be forcing your parents to take responsibility, because that's not what this is about, especially if you've even tried before and maybe you've been rejected, but you can become clear in your own mind about where the responsibility lies, right? And this alone is going to create that monumental shift in your own life. And for me, as I just said, that's the most important, right? It's the most powerful thing that you can do. It's not necessarily about, you know, holding them to account, putting them in front of a judge, trying to face them. It's just about you breaking the chain. So now I'm going to question you again. I'm going to get you to really go deep, go reflective, right? I want you to think about, we're going to come to an end very soon. I want you to think about, do you recognize these behaviors in your childhood? Yeah? What did you witness or experience as a child? Now, again, this is about inner healing work. This is about, you can be writing this down, you can be thinking about it, you can be sharing it with somebody. You know, I'm an open book for you and an open space for you. This group is an open space for you. You can share that. Do you now recognize this chain in your own parenting skills? Yeah. Do you witness your own child having emotional outbursts? Are you able to meet their emotional needs? Now, this is not saying we're bad mums. This is not saying we're bad parents. This is saying, are we able to meet our child's emotional needs? Do you have unresolved trauma yourself that's stopping you from meeting those child's needs? Because that's not something to be ashamed of. That's not something to be blaming yourself for. That's going back to your parents, right? Can you see now where I'm going with breaking the chain? You know, if you can't accept and kind of admit, you know, yes, okay, so this time, you know, I don't meet that very often, or maybe I need to meet that more, then this is about how we break the chain, right? Do you find yourself maybe lashing out, or getting anxious really quickly and having a really emotional response with your child? Okay, so there are just a few questions that I want you to be reflective on and think about. And when you blamed yourself for your suffering as a child, it's going to skew responsibility. It's going to affect so many areas in our lives. It's really that simple. So, for example, if I'm blaming my child now for the difficulties in my relationships, then I'm just continuing the cycle, right? So if I'm putting that pressure onto my child, then I'm continuing the cycle. And there's many, many ways we can do this, and I can't cover it all in the, you know, on a quick topic discussion. I can't cover it all. I mean, there's loads of how we meet or try to meet emotional needs through our children. Okay, so what do we need to do? That's the big question, isn't it? That's the like bomb. That's the okay, she said all this, but what do I need to do? So what you need to do is, one, you now need to take responsibility for the following, and I'm going to list them out for you. And I've written them down just because there's so much for me to try to remember on this topic, because it's so exhausting. It's like there's so much more to this topic than what I'm covering now. So you need to take responsibility for the following. First of all, self-esteem. Now I'm talking about your self-esteem, right? Ridding your negative beliefs about yourself that have come through the toxic parenting. Your self-esteem would have been deeply affected, right? So you're carrying around these core beliefs about yourself, okay? And I talked about this, didn't I? I did a topic on this about self-belief and how we can have those 5-step process of minimizing the impact of the core beliefs, right? And obviously coming to the realization that they're not actually true, right? And then you will commit yourself to build your self-esteem, yeah, and to have a self-awareness about who you are and want to develop yourself to be a better person, or to be the person who you want to be. You know, that's the purpose of life, is to constantly strive to be the person that we want to be, regardless of our toxic upbringing as such, yeah? And the next thing you need to do is life outcomes, right? So this is healing from your abuse and your neglect, so that you can create a life for yourself that you are happy with, not what someone else wants from you. Because when you've come from a toxic environment, you're still trying to please that parent. You're still trying to be who they wanted you to be, or maybe you're trying to be who they wanted to be that they didn't succeed in, right? We see it all the time, don't we, ladies, where you know, your mum wants you to be, or your dad wants you to be an accountant, or wants you to be a doctor because he never got to be the doctor. So he's putting his emotional needs and loss onto you. So then you're striving to be that person. And if you don't meet that, then your life outcomes are just really confusing. They're not really about you, and you just lose a sense of yourself. So you want to make a life that you want and not based on somebody else, okay? And then obviously, how do we break the chain? Is your parenting, right? And yeah, that's hard. Just don't be in the danger zone of repeating the cycles. And if you are in the danger zone of repeating the cycle, then congratulations and bloody well done to you that you recognize it. Because many, many parents before us never even recognized it. It was just normal. It was just the way of the world, you know. This is about you actually recognizing it, okay? And then you take responsibility for your parenting. You meet your child's needs in the best way that you can, right? And only you know what you can do. You know, if you face up to this, ladies, like I've had to do, you will know whether you're doing the best that you can or whether you're actually sitting there thinking, probably could be doing a little bit more. You know, and I'm very conscious of this recently, especially around my 4-year-old. You know, my kids have been around trauma, you know, and I have to face that, and I have to deal with that, and I have to accept that, and I have to try my damnedest to meet the 4 A's, yeah, because I'm trying to deal with all my stuff in the background, yeah. And I'm very conscious of this, you know, like today, just as an example, I'm so conscious of it. My little boy, my little 4-year-old, he comes over, gives mummy a hug, gives mummy a kiss, and I give him his affection, and I love him to bits, and he's just my little baby boy. And then there's those times where, you know, you're trying to do the cooking or you're trying to do the cleaning, and they come over to give you affection. You're like, 1 minute, not now. Now, I'm not saying we have to jump to that every need. You know, there's situations where we can't physically, but in your head, if you know that actually, oh, I shouldn't have done that. We know instinctively whether we're meeting those needs, right? So this is not to blame yourself, right? I'm going to repeat, but it's to heal yourself in order to be your better self. And it can take time to reframe all of those thoughts about yourself and changing your own learned behaviors. It's not an overnight process, but after recognition comes persistence. So if you know, then you are the one that can make the change. No therapy, no drugs, no this, no that, no nothing is going to make that change. Only you, right? So you know what you need to do, basically. So the next time you have an outburst, no, don't blame yourself, yeah? Don't come down harder on yourself. That's just not even dealing with the reality. What I'm saying is, and actually that will probably make it harder to break the chain, right? So now if you go away here and then think, oh my God, I'm such a bad parent. Oh my God, I didn't do this for my child, and my mum never did this for me, and now I can see that. Don't come down hard on yourself, ladies, because that's just going to make it even harder to break the chain. What you want to do is sit and say to myself, but I was just a child too, and that's my child. And then feel that inside of you and just say, okay, so this time I reacted in such and such a way, and I will aim to do it such and such a way next time. That is literally all we can do. And then over time, slowly always put in our own childhood innocence at the forefront. We're going to put our own children at the forefront. And over time, it will just become a lot easier to be able to deal with how we react to our children, to our husbands, to our mums, you know, to the people who love us, the people who care about us, people who are trying to meet our 4 A's, our emotional needs, and we push them away and we can't deal with them. Okay, so it is really about going easy on yourself. Is how you're going to break the chain. This is not about coming down hard and going, you're wrong, this is what you haven't done. It's not. So when you feel yourself getting anxious, when you can feel yourself burning up with, you know, your own emotional you know, well-being needs, or your child's driving you up the wall, the kids are going wild and they need to go to bed, exactly that. Just take a step back and breathe, okay? Give yourself some of that positive self-talk. Give yourself some of that, I was a child, they're a child, innocence coming into it. And just kind of, you know, we're so hard on ourselves, blaming ourselves to be not good enough parents and this, that, and it comes from our toxic upbringing. It comes from expectations that we never met for our parents, you know. So it's about really getting into that deep inner healing work. Because this is a question for you, right? If you hear about a child being abused, right? Many of you followed my story, so you've seen my story. I am absolutely sure that you were emotionally reactive when you saw my story go public, right? When I waived my anonymity and it went out there in the press. I'm absolutely sure that you had emotional reaction to when I was a child and what I suffered, right? So then why is it so hard to not recognize your own childhood innocence? Why is it so hard for you to not recognize some of the sufferings that you went through in your childhood, and that's okay to feel the way you do about it, right? Why is that so difficult? And then I want you to think about, have you come to a place of no blame? Because that's where you need to be. You can't be at a place of blame. The more you blame and shame yourself, the harder it's going to be, one, for you to heal, and two, for you to break the chain. And do you need, or do you want more help in breaking that chain of toxic parenting or toxic parents? Do you need to reparent yourself and, you know, deal with your inner child? Because this is what it's about. It's about dealing with us as when we were a child and what we haven't met. So I'm going to round that up now, because I will be releasing my inner child healing workshops. So where you will actually be able to see your own innocence and blamelessness in the treatment that you received as a child. And my inner child healing workshops, they literally create a breakthrough. You're not going to get no airy fairy stuff if you've just seen already just on this short live. You're going to get the real deep pain work that you need to heal, to recognize that you were helpless and that you were just that innocent child who wanted to be loved and cared for, who wanted their 4 A's to be met. Yeah, and then you can heal, and we can come to a place of releasing self-blame. So I'll be talking about the inner child healing workshops that will be coming soon in a later time anyway. But for now, I want you to take these nuggets away with you, to be aware of fog, yeah, fear, obligation, and guilt. So be aware of those 3. And again, this is about you doing the deep inner healing work. This is about you recognize the toxic environment that you're in, and are you following that forward? Or worse, have you not accepted it and dealt with it inside, because you deserve to be free from it? So ladies, I am going to end that there, because I knew this live was probably going to be a lot longer than I normally aim for. I am going to have a look back at the comments. I can see there's quite a few comments there. You've got a Q&A post that will be going out in about half an hour following up from this topic. So please come at me with any questions. You can put your questions in the comments. And like I said, I just want to leave with you on that note that yes, it's hard. It's not talked about. It's socially an issue, excusing behaviors and just denying who you are, denying your own childhood, denying who you are as a person. And it's hard, and it's a big smack in the face sometimes for us as parents now, and how we're continuing the cycle. But also it's about you. It's about you recognizing you. It's about you allowing yourself to internally heal from what you didn't have met, so that you can go on and meet that. And like I said, that's with children, that's with relationships. It's stopping those cycles of, you know, abusive relationships and that you might be getting into constantly. It's about not having any boundaries. Maybe you don't set boundaries anymore. There is so much that all comes from the inner child and the childhood. And like I said, don't go away thinking, oh well, yeah, that's not my childhood, because the milder forms of the toxic parenting is the hardest to see. And like I said, it's those things like those small little comments on all that humiliation that you went through. So you've really got to get deeper and real, and stop denying it and face those facts so that you can break the chain. And I know that you can, because we can, because that's who we are. We have survived. We are wonderful, wonderful women. You are a wonderful woman, and you deserve to heal, and you deserve to be the best version of yourself. And I will say that over and over again until you actually believe it. So thank you so much for joining me on this discussion, and I will take your Q&As, and I will be back with you another time for another topic.